For those of you who don't know, this is organized by the Career Development Initiative by the Globe Institute. And among other things, this initiative invites successful people from Denmark who at some point in their career had biology and science background, and then at some point diverged into various different fields or continued into science. And we have opportunity, of course, to ask questions about their life experience, about their career choices, etc. So this is a unique opportunity for us to be, engaged into direct questions and answers, which is super nice. Today we have Stinus Lindgreen. He's a politician at the Danish Parliament now, currently. And on behalf of career development and the whole Globe Institute, I would like to thank Stinus for accepting this call for giving the presentation, which is really nice. And he was a bioinformatician, and some of you may already indirectly know him because every time we do adapter removal, we reference one of his works every time we which most of us do. So, but now he's here in person. So thanks again, Stinus, for agreeing. And I guess we'll leave the rest to you.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It's like being back in my old life. This is great, and I do recognize quite a lot of names on the list here, so that's good. So I've been asked to give like a 15-minute presentation of my life, and then open up for questions. So I was born in 1980, and let's just skip to the science part. So as many of you know, as was just said, I'm a bioinformatician, have a background in computer science and bioinformatics from University of Copenhagen. I did start in computer science and realized quite fast that it was extremely boring. What I liked about it was the algorithms, but I needed to use it for something real, something relevant. And it just happened to be so that bioinformatics was starting up when I was finishing my bachelor's degree in computer science, and I've always loved biology. So I saw an opportunity to use computer science within a field of relevance, namely biology. So I changed my career path and did a master's in bioinformatics with Anders Krogh, as I'm sure a lot of you know, working on non-coding RNA, which was quite a big thing back then. Still is, I guess. But that was like a hype back then. Did my master's and did a PhD, again with Anders Krogh and Paul Gardner, as I guess at least some of you know him as well. He's in New Zealand now, back in New Zealand, I should say. He's a Kiwi. A great guy, and I did a lot of RNA research with him. Then he left Copenhagen, and I was sitting there thinking, so what should I do now? And it just happened to be so that a up-and-coming researcher called Eske Willerslev was setting up his lab in Copenhagen at the same time. And he was talking to Anders about having to do some bioinformatics analysis and working on this ancient DNA stuff, and they didn't really know how to do it because nobody else had done it before. And if he knew somebody who would be interested in that. So Anders asked me if I wanted to, again, change focus and work on ancient DNA. And I thought, well, why not? That sounds like a fun challenge. So halfway through my PhD, I changed focus from non-coding RNA to ancient DNA instead, working with Eske and all his people on the now, I guess, famous Sakak paper. Must be like 10 years ago, isn't it? It came out in Nature, I think. Wow, I should have celebrated that. I forgot. I've been busy with other things. So anyway, so we changed focus and started working with Eske on how to analyze this ancient DNA, because there was completely different, fragmented, short fragments, all these weird errors, and all that made it an interesting challenge in bioinformatics. So I worked on that for a number of years, my PhD and a follow-up postdoc, also with Tom, of course, on the Sakak genome primarily, but also the Aborigine genome and some ancient horse stuff. But I've mainly been on the algorithms part of it, so developing algorithms to analyze data and all that. Then, as you have to do, as many of you I can see have done as well, I decided to move abroad. So back in, when was that? 12, I think. January 2012, I moved to New Zealand. with my wife and kids, and spent 3 years down there in Christchurch. Interesting place, especially because we arrived just after the major earthquake, so there wasn't a lot of city left when we arrived, but a fascinating place. If you ever get the chance to go to New Zealand, definitely go. So we spent 3 years there, and again, I decided to work on something completely different. That's the good thing about being a bioinformatician, because DNA is DNA, right? RNA is RNA. So if you know how to analyze it in one setting, you can do it in another setting as well. So I started working on a number of different projects, one on evolution of E. coli, but my main project was, that's what I got a Marie Curie fellowship to work on, was based on looking at samples from ground in what's it called? We had this lab set up where we had plots of land that had been heated to, I think, 3 degrees above ambient, some of them fertilized and combinations of that. And we looked at how the microbiome in soil was changed over time. So metagenomics, basically, which was back then also a field that was in development. Really interesting, still is hugely interesting field. So we wanted to look at how climate change affected microbes in soil, and how the interactions between that and plants and insects changed over time. So a really fascinating, highly complex research project. Again, just as with the ancient DNA stuff, a project that I couldn't do alone, obviously. So we had to work together across fields with a lot of different expertises involved. That was a great project, I think. So that's where I got into the field of metagenomics and developed a few tools in that area. And also did, again, because it can be applied to soil, you can also apply it to other areas. So we also worked on infectious diseases and other interesting fields where you could use these tools. So I came back to Denmark in 15, and as an aside, because that's kind of relevant to where I am now, that was just after, when there was an election in Denmark, where the party that I'm now representing was cut in half, and another party called the Dansk Folkeparti, the Danish People's Party, was increased quite a lot. So I've never been a member of a party until then. I've always voted for what is called Radikale Venstre, or the Social Liberal Party, but I wasn't involved in politics. But in 15, when I came back from New Zealand, we had this election, then I decided to join just as an ordinary member, just because I thought I wanted to support them and show that at least not all the voters had left them. So I just became a member. I didn't have any plans of doing anything with that. I just became a member of a party. That was that. At the same time, I shifted from academia to the private industry. So I joined the laboratory at Carlsberg, also interesting place, because they wanted to do some ancient DNA work as well. And since I've always had an interest in beer as well, not just drinking it, also making it, as some of you know, I started a microbrew with my brother back in 2006 called Djævlebrygg, or Devil's Brew. So I had an interest both in genetics and ancient DNA, and beer brewing and all that. So I thought it was an ideal place to go. So I did that for various reasons. It wasn't a perfect fit. They changed focus quite a lot, quite rapidly. So I decided to leave again and joined Stinus Diabetes Center, working on obviously diabetes, and stayed there for a few years until I changed again to Lundbeck, working in the pharmaceutical industry, doing research in primarily Alzheimer's and depression, also some Parkinson work, but so that area of research, really fascinating subject area, I think, and also an interesting field to be in, because as you probably know, a lot of people have strong opinions about the medical industry. Some of them well-based, some of them not. But working there in the research part of it is fascinating. And you can see a lot of people really want to do something for patients and understand diseases better. So I really enjoyed my time there. So when I quit Lundbeck, it wasn't because I was fed up or had cured Alzheimer's, anything like that. It was because I was elected to parliament. So I kind of had to quit because I got another job with very short warning, so to speak. So that was last year, in June last year. The election was on June 5th, and I was I got expedited. I quit, obviously, but they let me go on the 15th of June. You had to. That's how it is. Normally, it would have been until the end of July, but that's they decided to let me go faster than normal because of the extraordinary circumstances. So that was a very short walkthrough of my career. So why did I end up in here? Why do I waste my education sitting in Parliament? I ask myself that question every day. So that's a very good question. Why do I do this? So it actually goes back quite a bit. I've always been involved in the public debate about science and science-related questions like vaccines, climate change, alternative medicine, where I think vaccines is an obvious, that's a big thing. And that's kind of what really got me involved here. And I think that all of us sitting here, we have an education paid for by the public. And I think we have an obligation to be engaged, to use our knowledge, to take part in the public debate. I've always done that. And I think more researchers, more scientists should do that. It's sorely missing out there. So I've always been involved, not in a party politics kind of way, but I've always been involved in the debate. So when I decided to become a member of Radikale Venstre back in 2015, as I mentioned, as I said, I didn't have any plans to do anything with it. But I thought, why not go to one of the board meetings just to, meet people and say, hi, I'm a new member. And as it is in Denmark, for instance, those of you who have kids to go to school or kindergarten, suddenly you go to one of these meetings and then you are, head of something, or you have to take care of organizing play dates or whatever. It was the same here. I showed up and suddenly I was not just an ordinary member, but actually a member of the board in my local part of the party. And then suddenly our local candidate for parliament decided to not continue. So there was an empty space. And I thought, well, maybe just for the fun of it, maybe I should, become a candidate for this. So I said that and people said, oh, that's a great idea. And suddenly I was a candidate and now suddenly I'm sitting in here. So one thing led to another, so to speak. But it wasn't planned. It kind of happened. But what I realized was that, and that goes for my party as it does for, I guess, all other parties in here, there aren't a lot of people like us in politics. And like us, I mean, with a natural science background. So I thought I had something to add. First, just as a member, debating and giving my feedback. And then I thought, well, if I think there's somebody missing in here who knows science and research, I know that. So if other people feel the same way, they can vote for me. And if enough people think it's a good idea, then I might be elected. And that's kind of what happened. So now I'm sitting in here and I don't know what you call that in Danish, ordførerskaber. What I'm the speaker, I guess, for the party, for research, for health, psychiatry, heavy metal, one of my bigger roles, of course. So that's obviously areas that I know a lot about, and I can add input to the debates in here. And I think that's a good thing. And I would hope that all parties would have a more diverse group of people sitting in here. I think that qualifies our government, basically. So I guess that'll be the words for now, and then people can ask questions. I can keep talking, of course. That's what I do for a living.
No, that sounds great. Thank you so much for the talk, Stinus. So right now I'll be moderating the questions. So if you have any questions for Stinus, please write them in the chat or use the raise hand. And we can admit you. So Tom, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Stinus. That was really super to hear. I hadn't realized how unplanned it was. Just to touch on your last point, why are there so few scientists in Parliament? I know there are, you've told me this, but I'm very curious your thoughts on why that is. Why are you so unique there?
That's a very good question. I think, at least for my case, when I was in research, if you had asked me 5 years ago, 6 years ago, if I was planning to go to politics, I would say, you must be crazy. Why would I do that? I love science. I love research. I want to do this for the rest of my life. I've always seen myself as a researcher. And And I still call myself that from time to time. I don't know if I'm allowed to do that, but I did that just last week in a debate. So I guess it's because when people do what we do, they really love it and they want to do it. And you can't really combine this life with doing actual research. This being in politics, if you want to do it right, it takes a lot of time. I mean, I've never been more busy than I am now. Obviously, the corona epidemic has kind of made it even worse for me because that's my area right now. But even before that, it's if you want to do this, you can work 24 hours a day and still not get everything done. So you have to give up your scientific career. That's what I did as well. And I don't think people realize how big of a sacrifice, in lack of a better word, that actually is. When I decided to become a candidate, I made it sound like it was an easy choice. It actually wasn't. It took a lot of thinking and a lot of talking to people that I know to the pros and cons of whether I should do this. Because when I decided to become a candidate, I didn't do it just for fun. When I took that step, it was because I wanted to actually do something with it. And I realized that if I was elected, that would mean that I would have to quit my current job, obviously, or my previous job. And also, if I'm sitting in here for, I don't know, 4 years or more, I can't just go back to where I left because the field, as you know, it moves fast. And I can't keep up to date now. And I would be way behind. So I would have to do something else if I decide not to continue this way here, or if I'm not elected again, obviously. So it wasn't an easy choice. So I think that's part of it. And I also think that people don't realize, I think, how our government actually works and how people are elected and who are these people sitting in here. I think people don't realize that it's normal people. I mean, everybody who's a member of a party can, in principle, become a candidate and get elected. That sounds easy. It's not as easy as that, obviously, but that's how it works. And I think people would have to realize that and see that you can actually add benefit. You can add value in a completely different way in here compared to doing research. But it is, it's a kind of a hard choice to make.
Yeah. I have a quick question before we go on related to your choice to become a politician. Did you, during your time at university, get involved in any student politics, or do you wish now that you had been a part of the student politics at university?
No, I actually wasn't. I wasn't a member either of any of the youth political parties. As I said, I wasn't involved in politics before this. I wasn't involved in student politics either. I think there's an overlap between people who are involved in that and who are also active in political parties. I don't know, but that's just my gut feeling. The only thing I was involved in was planning educations and reading through applicants and all that. So not the politics part of it, more the science and education part of it.
Great. Hannes, you have a question?
Hi, Stinus. Thanks for taking the time to join us. I mean, it makes sense what you say in terms of also learning how the system works, right? To actually see the internal workings. So now, maybe a bit of a tough question, but having joined politics, like, do you get the feeling that you can actually affect change, or is your daily life like, taken up of committee meetings and and if the answer is yes, can you give us a couple of examples maybe of how you can affect positive change?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I still ask myself the question whether this is the best or the worst decision of my life. I have not regretted yet sitting in here, but it is completely different from what I'm used to. I mean, this world in here is, it's not like anything I've ever seen anywhere else in the world, for good and bad. Whether I can affect things, yes, definitely. And that's what I realized also before I became elected. You can actually, if you get involved and if you have good arguments, at least in my party, I don't know how it works in other parties, obviously, but you can actually affect how politics are made by just joining and becoming an active member of a party. So that's also something for all of you to consider, that you don't have to give up science and become a full-time politician, but you can actually get involved in politics in other ways and have a positive effect. I mean, you have to think about how do you think changes are made? How do you think laws are written? It's because somebody suggested it. So if you affect that process, you can actually steer decisions in the right direction. So that's something to consider. And in here, yes, things have been different, obviously, because of the corona epidemic. So a lot of things have been put on hold. But for instance, when we in November, we had to negotiate what is called forskningsreserve, so part of the science budget in Denmark. And sitting there, it's quite obvious that obviously I know that area from the other from the other side of the bench, so to speak. So I had some input to those discussions that wouldn't have been there if I had not been elected, obviously. And I put a lot of effort into the whole how much of the budget should be strategic and how much should be free, so to speak. So that's a very important debate, I think, and where I think we should not in here in Parliament put research budgets into small boxes and say this has to go to this specific project and this should go to that project. I think it's better for us to we can put the broad lines and say we have to do a lot of research in, I don't know, green research, whatever, but we shouldn't be too specific. So that's a battle that I fought and to at least some degree won, and I think that's important. I'm also trying to raise the research budget as such. That has just become a lot harder now because, as you know, our economy is not in the best shape because of the corona epidemic, but still, I think even now, it's more important to do that because that's how we survive, that's how we develop, that's how we flourish. We have to invest in research and education in a time like this. So I'm fighting that battle as well. Within health, one area that kind of been put on hold because of the corona epidemic was how we control alternative medicine and how we make sure that people are not conned by people with bad intent. And we actually did a lot of work there and came a long way. It's been put on hold now because of this, but it'll be started up again after the summer holidays, so in October or something like that. So that's another area where I actually can affect change quite a lot. So yes, people do listen, and if you have good arguments, people also listen to that. So that's a good thing to experience in here.
Thanks.
Great. Morten, you have a question?
Yeah, okay. Hi, Stinus. Thanks so far. We are glad to have you in there. It's just a quick follow-up to Tom's first question. If you, and more about Parliament gossip than about you in particular, but how do you sense the differences among the different parties, or maybe blocks of parties, in terms of how they prioritize science? And do you think the fact that you ran for Radikale made it easier for you to just so quickly shift from non-politics to politics?
Yeah, so well, obviously I ran for this party because that's the one I was, I disagreed with the least, so to speak. So that's how it is. I mean, you don't necessarily agree with everything a party does, but this is where I've always seen myself way before I became a member. And obviously this party has an academic inclination, so I think that's part of the explanation. Also because even before I became a candidate for Parliament, I was quite involved in debates about health and research and science. So some people already knew my name before I ran for Parliament. So I think that's obviously part of it. There are parties in here that where my profile would not fit as well as it does here. That's for sure. So how do different parties prioritize research? Well, let me just say that you realize quite fast that you can have there are members of different parties that I agree with in some areas, but strongly disagree with in others. For instance, Henrik Dahl, who's a member of Parliament from Liberal Alliance, so on the right side of Parliament, there are a lot of things where we do not agree. But when it comes to research, we actually do agree quite a lot. So when we had to do these talks in November, him and I were completely aligned when it came to how to prioritize, how much to put things into small buckets in here, and how much to put into strategic and all that. And he's also a PhD, of course, not in our field, but in sociology. But he knows the research area as well, and we agreed a lot. The same actually with the member from Dansk Folkeparti in that area, he's an engineer. So there was this interesting alliance between parties who do not necessarily agree in other areas, but in this specific discussion, we were very much aligned. And then there are other parties who would rather have a lot of more, how do you say that, political say in how the money should be spent. That would be more on the left side of Parliament. So that's where my party fits. We can play with both sides of Parliament. That's what I like about it as well. It depends on the question at hand. So unfortunately, when we started talking about putting more money into science, we wanted to raise. So as you know, well, maybe you don't know, maybe you should know at least. In Denmark, the research budget, the official research budget is 1% of the national budget. So that means after a crisis like this, our national budget will go down because there's a crisis. That also means that our research budget will go down because it's always 1%. We've always said that 1% is not the goal. That's like the bare minimum. It should be at least 1%, but we think it should be way more than that. We want to raise it to 1.5% over time. We think it's not ambitious enough to just go for the lowest number we could. There doesn't seem to be a lot of backing for that, unfortunately. I'm working on that. I think we should get other parties to agree with us, like Venstre maybe. It's always easier to get the people in the opposition to agree with things like that. But I think there should be a national interest in increasing our budget. Right now, even if we can't do it as a permanent thing, we've said that we should put an additional 1 billion Danish kroner into research, because that's kind of what we're going to lose, it seems now. So if we don't do anything, we're looking into a cut of 1 billion in research by the end of the year, just because the national budget is decreasing. So we are working on that, and I think that's quite an important battle to fight, and I hope we can convince others of the same.
Thanks.
Great. Tom, you have a question?
Yeah. Firstly, just to the organizer, having Stinus trapped is like my dream. So you have a billion questions, and just ignore me if other people want to go, right? But so Stinus, actually, I mean, I was going to ask why Radicale, but you already answered that. But I have a very naive understanding of Parliament, and that basically goes, if you're in the small party, you have zero power, right? Because it's the big party does. But clearly, from what you're saying, this is wrong. So I guess my question is quite simple. Are you saying that even if you're in a party with a relatively few number of votes, I mean, I guess Radicale is like 5% of the seats, whatever, there is actually the possibility to affect change, right? Even though maybe you don't carry the majority. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes. So of course that depends on the actual numbers at the current time. But right now we have 16 seats in Parliament, and that actually means that I can make a majority with the current government and the parties Enhedslisten and SF. So the left side of Parliament, but I can also make a majority with the other side of Parliament. So that puts us in, well, not I, because not just one, but our group can. So that puts us in a kind of a sweet spot that we like. So we can, that does actually mean we have quite a lot of say in matters, even more than our numbers actually in themselves might indicate. So that's how, I mean, you have to count to 90 to get something through Parliament in Denmark. And we, as I said, we can do that to either side, so to speak. Was that an answer?
Yeah. I mean, I guess, yeah, you're right. The king made a thing. But actually then just to, follow up on that, what parties that are much smaller, like, for example, New Borgerlige or something, I mean, they feature remarkably loudly in the press, given there's only like one of them or two of them. But I mean, in your view, do they achieve anything because of their size, or is it like once you're at that level, essentially you have like...
Right. So there are a lot of aspects to that. Obviously, if you are a very small party, so they have 4 seats, Nye Borgerlige, right now. That's the minimum you can have. Well, actually, Liberal Alliance has 3. That's because they had 4, but one of them left. But that's just math. Anyway, if you are a small party and you are sitting on one of the extremes in parliament, then you don't have a lot of say because you have a limited number of people you can play with, so to speak. We are sitting in the center of politics, so depending on the questions, we can work with Venstre or we can work with Socialdemokratiet, so the big parties. Nye Borgerlige and Enhedslisten, for instance, they can't really do that to the same degree because they are far removed from one of the big parties. So that means they don't have a lot of say, at least not the same as we do. So that's just, it is a numbers game, right? But it also depends, obviously, on how the number of people have been distributed. Now I'm looking at the actual numbers right now. That's why I'm staring at my door, because I have a poster of all members of parliament right now. So it depends on, for instance, if Socialdemokratiet grew a lot and had a majority with, say, SF alone, then in principle, we might not have any say at all because they didn't have to ask us. Right now, they have to ask us because they don't have a majority on their own. And that's how it works. So if there's a majority for something, it has to be done. That's how parliament works in Denmark.
Thanks.
Okay, great. Anders, you have a question?
Yeah, it's just to, of course, I find that the talk about the economy quite interesting, also because it has huge consequences, right? And also because it has huge consequences on the short term, because it's directly linked to the BNP, right?
Yes.
And in that regard, you talked about when you divide money out, you want to work with the frame. Right, and do you have any clue about how this, if there is a reduction, how this would affect the frame? And I'm also thinking there's talk about additional 5,000 students. That's also going to cost some money, right? So if it's not compensated on the BNP, then there is definitely a bigger challenge that all of us needs to help solve, right? Yeah.
Right. So the 5,000 students, they are funded. That was a deal made last week, I think, Friday or something last week, Thursday.
Okay.
And there's money to go with those students. So don't worry about that part.
Cool.
The research budget is, I think, Dansk Industri, so Danish industry, put out last week a calculation showing that all things being equal, if we don't do anything now, such as the numbers are looking, we will look at a cut in the complete research budget of around, I think, 800 or 900 million kroner.
That's a lot. Yeah.
So that's, we thought it would be like 1 billion, so we're not completely off. So that's why we said earlier this year that we thought we should find 1 billion for research. So that's what will happen. If we don't do anything, research in Denmark will be cut by that amount. You have to know, of course, that means the complete budget. That means not only Innovation Fund Denmark and DFF and all that, it's also how money is distributed to the different universities and all that. So it's out of I think we have around 9.6 billion or so, something like that, roughly, in total. So that would be cut to around 9. And that's something that will be felt all through research, all through universities in Denmark, that's for sure. So we have to do something, I think, to counter that. We have to, as a bare minimum, I think, make sure that we do not cut compared to last year. But I think we should also invest more compared to last year, because that's what will grow the Danish economy, and that's also what will secure future workplaces in Denmark. That is research. That's what we have. We don't have a lot of natural resources. We do have a lot of clever people, and we should definitely invest in that. So was that an answer to your question?
Yeah, it was. And just to make it into like a career setting. So how? So when you hear something like that, what are your actions in the new environment that you are in right now? So what concrete, what experience are you? Of course, you're drawing on your experience as a researcher, and more the details about. But how do you concretely get into actions?
Yeah. So right now, what I can do is just say it, repeat it, and make sure that it's heard. And then, of course, talk to the other parties. So I talked to Winston the other day, for instance, about this. We have to talk to Socialdemokratiet. We have to discuss this and hear, what do they think? Do they think it's a completely stupid idea? And the important thing is, of course, to now, as early as possible, start these conversations, because then it's put on their radar. They might not have thought about it. It might not be that research is on the top of their list. But if I talk to them and make sure that they know it, then maybe it will be. Because we don't find any money right now, but in the fall when we have to do the new finance law, that's where we have to find this amount of money. So we have to start the debate now, and then we have to make sure that we put it on the table. We have to in autumn when we have to do these negotiations. So that's how it works right now.
Okay, so just the final one, then I'll shut up. So, so this also, is it completely clear in Parliament that this COVID-19 situation, to see what you can call the trends about that, is actually an advocate for putting funding into basic research? Because, you know, the better position we are in basic research-wise, the better. A better way we are into meeting these challenges, these global challenges. And if we continue just to run after one problem, then we'll keep being behind and not on the forefront. Is that message at all, you know, or they're just so focused on the COVID-19, so everybody has to do virus research now?
See, that's the problem, because unfortunately not. The way it works, you can see that, right? So suddenly we found, I don't know, was it 100 million for research, but specifically in COVID-19. And of course, that it might make sense for something urgent where you say, oh, we think we know how to treat this or that or whatever. But you can also see now there was a list just the other day showing that, was it 200 or so research projects worldwide in COVID-19 were flawed in some way or another quite seriously. And that's what happens, of course, when you put a lot of money in a specific area and people are working way too fast, then errors will pop up and people will make bad science. So that's not the way to solve it. What I've been trying to say in here, and I hope will be heard if I repeat it enough, is that this shows that we have to always invest in research broadly, not specifically in this disease, because that's what we have now, but that's not what's going to hit us in 5 years or 10 years. There's going to be something else. So we have to learn about how to deal with epidemics, but you shouldn't invest all your money in last year's problems, obviously. Also, I think this makes it clear that we should invest in public medical research to make sure that we are up to speed and we can actually lift this quite important task. There are areas, obviously, that are not interesting for the industry, and we have to do that in a public setting. So I hope people realize now that it was not just some crazy idea I had, but it actually shows that this is something that needs to be funded. But unfortunately, I think people don't realize in here that we have to fund broadly and we have to fund basic research as well. People are inclined to invest in what they think is the problem right now. And that's what I'm trying to kind of counter to some degree, at least.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for giving a talk today. It's really good. Thank you.
Okay, great. We have a question from YouTube, and I just have to find it. So this is the Summer Jays asking, how can scientists, both nationals and foreigners, help increase the budget to science in Denmark? And I would like to add a little bit onto that. Do we all need to change career paths to politics to help the budget, or how is it short-term, long-term in career paths?
Well, short-term, if politician in here came from research, then I think the budget would be increased quite a lot. But obviously we can't lose all the good scientists to waste their time in here. So we need you to do research as well. But it wouldn't hurt with one or more, just a few more people in here with some research understanding. I'm sure that would increase the debates as well. So what can you do to increase the research budget in Denmark? Well, in one way you can't really do anything because it's not in your power. The problem is if you write a grant and get EU money, I'm looking at you, Tom, then you'll get some sum of money to Denmark, but that will be actually counted in the national budget, which is crazy, but that's how it is. So if you earn 10 million from EU, then we will cut the public budget by 10 million because we kind of count that into the total research budget. A lot of people don't realize that, but that's how it works. So the more money you get from EU, the less money we are actually giving from Parliament, because that's part of the 1% of the BNP. That's how it works. I and others have said that's a problem and it shouldn't be done like that, but that's how it is currently done. I've actually asked the minister to make a calculation about the 1% of BNP in Denmark. How is that actually split between different fields? How do we actually spend that money? Because it's completely unclear right now how much of that 1% actually goes to research, how much goes to just paying the rent and other things. We need to know that. And it's not clear right now. Nobody knows, because there's a lot of money flowing back and forth between different ministries, which makes it really hard. But I've asked to see those numbers because then we can have a more open debate about it. Because obviously if we gave 1% of BNP directly to research, and that would be a huge increase in the national research budget, because that would be like 9 billion. That's not where we are right now, because we count a lot of other things. So in one way, you can't do anything to increase the national budget, but on the other hand, you can. And that's what I started by saying, that I think we as researchers have to take part in the public debate. And that includes saying things like that we need to invest more in research. If you're a member of a party, any party, not just my party, tell your local member of parliament or your local group that this is something important. You should do something. You can actually affect parties by getting involved. So that's another way. You don't have to give up your career and spend time in politics. You can try to do it in other ways. If there's a debate about it, you shouldn't just sit at home and agree. You should actually say something, write something, do something. Because the more people who say something, the more we do.
Great. Ashad, you had a question?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, one of the questions, so what do you think are the main challenges that you have basically? I mean, you're essentially new into this field, right? You came from a pretty diverse background into a couple of different fields, which was actually interesting in itself, of course, but like as a new without having political background, what do you think is like the most challenging thing? And maybe connected to this, I mean, you are also sort of biased, right, into scientific, obviously, into politics, into the science, obviously, that's your background. So do you feel this bias somehow? Because I mean, the politics has to be sort of fair, right, to the, I mean, it serves the whole like people, and like this, how this bias sort of, I mean, that's kind of course the point, having people with different backgrounds and like to sort of balance things out. But how do you think that affects, you know, choices in which directions? And
yeah, that's a great question. So obviously all of us have biases. All of us have interests and things we know something about, or things we want to do something about. That's why people are sitting in here. So for sure, I think research is important, and I'm a member of a party that has always said that it's important. Of course, that's why I'm a member of this specific party. So that doesn't mean that I think we should spend all money on research and give up on all other areas, obviously. For sure, that would be a crazy idea. So what I primarily think, the way I use my background is more how, as all of you do, how do you get new knowledge? How do you reason? How do you argue? All of that, understanding complex problems, which is what we're sitting with in here. I mean, you know, doing a PhD, you have a lot of things to read and a lot of ground to cover, a lot of aspects to understand. In here, it's the same, but the scale is just crazy. I mean, you wouldn't imagine how much you get to read every day. And obviously, I can't do that. Nobody can. It's impossible. Even if I spent all my waking hours reading, I wouldn't be able to do it. So you have to prioritize, of course, and you have to kind of see what is the case, what is the arguments for and against. Talk to people who know more. I mean, we all talk to well, I guess you call them lobbyists, which they are, of course. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It has a negative connotation, I know that, but it just means that people who have interest, it could be researchers, it could be, I don't know, people from universities, it could be doctors, it could be whatever. They call me up or come in here and say, we have this problem, we think you should be aware of this and that detail, and maybe if we change this, that's how we learn, that's how we know what to do. Nobody in here knows everything, obviously. So we have to be made aware of problems to solve them. So that's what I do. The way it works is, of course, I have my areas, as I said, health and research. So that's what I spend my time on. Other members have other areas. That doesn't mean that we discuss everything in the group, but we have kind of divided the responsibilities, of course. So doesn't mean that the only thing I can't worry about is science, but it means, of course, that's when I'm sitting in those discussions, that's what I try to push to prioritize more. What was the other question you had?
Like the challenges, probably.
Oh, yes. So, I mean, this is, as I started saying, it's a very different world from anything I've ever tried before, in good and bad. The one thing that I like the least is the whole spin thing. When you read in the media how things are presented, and you can I often read articles about a subject that I know because I was part of the negotiations, whatever. And I can just see that the way it's put forth is not correct. People are quoted for things that I know they know is not true. And that really bugs me. That part of politics, I think, is really annoying. What I do like is when you realize that people sitting in here, even from parties that you don't agree with, people from parties that you might not like, there are members there that on a personal level are really good people. They want to do what is best for Denmark. We might not agree on what that is, but they are not here because they want to hurt people. They actually want to do something. And as I started by saying, I know members from all the different parties that I like on a personal level and agree with on a political level. From the whole spectrum, from Enhedslisten to Dansk Folkeparti, there are people there that I like, and we can agree on things. Even if we don't agree, I can have a nice conversation with them, because it's important to know where we don't agree as well, because that's how politics work. So that's a good thing. You realize it's not a battle. It's not, at least not always. It's not like we're all enemies in here, and that's really nice to experience that.
Thanks, James.
I have a question in chat, and then I know Lasse has a question after that, and then I think we're almost out of time, so I'll finish up with the last question after that. But in chat, I've been asked Thijs, who's asked us, who helps you come up with the argument for the cases you make, e.g. more funding for basic research, and are you still connected to the scientific community, university leadership, etc.?
Yeah, so depends on the subject area. We do have some people working here that can help me dig up articles or read through things that I don't have time to read through and find out what is most important. Otherwise, it's talking to, as I said, people of, lobbyists or interest groups, if you want to call them that, to learn what is actually going on out there. So that's, and then of course, a lot of it I know because I've been in that field. So I know how research works. I know how funding works and all that. So I use a lot of my personal experience when we discuss how to distribute funding, and that it's important not only to focus on well-established researchers such as Eske and Tom. It's also important to focus on up-and-coming PhD students and postdocs. We have to remember the whole chain through research, things like that, because I know it, I've been there, so I know what the problems are. And do I still have connections to the scientific community? Not in a professional way, so to speak. I don't do research anymore. I don't have time for that. But I mean, I'm sitting here. So yes, I do have connections still, and I still talk to researchers, not as often as I would like. But I do try to keep up to date on what's going on. And I mean, I've talked to Tom a number of times, but then the corona happened and kind of I was busy with other things. But I try to keep up to date, and I really enjoy it when people reach out and contact me from my previous life, so to speak, because it's important to know what's going on, and it's important to know what problems there are out there, and things change, of course. So I need to be kept up to date in that area.
Great. Lasse, you had a question?
Yes, well, you alluded to it already, and thanks for sharing all your thoughts. This is really interesting. In science, I have the feeling that most people will be seeking the truth and basically ignoring everything else, outside their own field, and they can say, well, this is not really my area, and they can dig into what they find interesting. In politics, even if you find a party that you agree with reasonably well, I mean, I have the feeling that you may have to accept things that you might dislike a lot, maybe, and maybe have it to defend it. So now you talked a lot about all the great things that you can actually affect positive change, but I guess there's always something where you have to say, well, okay, this is part of the job that I really dislike. What is that?
You're right. I mean, politics is compromise. So when we are making a deal of some sort, we get something and we have to agree to accept other things as well. That's part of it. We don't get, I mean, it's not a one-party rule all system in Denmark, and I think that's a good thing. And we don't decide everything. So that also means that if we do make a political deal, and I'm part of that, then I have to defend it. That's how it is. If my mandates are part of the numbers, then I have to defend it. And that can be a challenge, of course. I can't right now think of a deal that I've made where I really disagree with something in it, but obviously that's how it would be. We made a big deal about tobacco before Christmas. It's been postponed because, again, of Corona, where we would discuss that for a long time. How do we do this? Where should we change the laws and all that? And that could be something where in the end I was saying, okay, I have to agree on this because most people wanted that. And then I would have to defend it because that's part of it. It's really bad form to make a deal and then say, well, I think it's a really bad deal. So that's not how you get involved in other deals, at least. So that's how it works. But you're completely right. That's part of it. Could also be that my group does something in some area, not my area, but another area, and that's our politic now, then I have to defend it. And that's part of it. And how I'm going to deal with that, I don't know yet. We'll find out, because it is a challenge. It really is a challenge, that's for sure.
So basically, there's, okay, to follow up just short, and there could be a price for everything. I mean, if you really want something through, you might have to accept a bigger part that is basically unacceptable to you. And this must be very different from your science background, where you basically can go with the data at all times, right?
Definitely. Politics is compromise. That's how it works. And it's not always the best arguments. That's something I've learned as well. It's not always enough to point at data and all that. There are other things at stake. Could be one party wants to annoy another party just because they want to, and therefore they're going to vote against something that in principle they would like to do, but just to make, to annoy people. So and that's part of politics that I don't really like that much, but it's part of it. The whole compromise thing, I think it has to be that way.
But is it compromise? Is it compromise, or is it buying and selling?
What's the difference? I mean, that's how it is. When we're sitting down, in principle, we could be like 10 parties, now even more, I guess, if you count all the new split-off parties. We have to sit down, we have to agree on something. Obviously, we can't agree in most cases on everything. And if you want all of them to be part of the deal, we have to all see ourselves in it. So that means you have to, a compromise might also be that you might not have to agree on something you don't really like. It might be that you just can't go as far as you wanted to go, if you understand what I mean. So it might be that I want to, for instance, raise the budget to 1.5% of the BNP. I can't get a majority for that, so we raise it to 1.2, for instance. That will not be great, but just hypothetically speaking, right? There will be a compromise where if I was on my own, I would have done more, but that's how it is. So it's not always a bad thing.
So I'm sorry, I have to cut off because we have 1 minute left, and I wanted to wrap up quickly. I wanted a very, very quick yes/no kind of answer. Do you see yourself ever going back to science after politics, or are you heading towards politics? Like, I know it's been very
great question.
Yeah.
So as I keep saying, I have not really decided whether this is the worst or the best decision of my life. Now I'm sitting here until the next election. I'm sure I'll run again for the next election. But what will happen after? I don't know. I can't go back to my previous role because, the field has moved on. So I don't really know. So it kind of was a goodbye to science for me, and that was sad, and it wasn't an easy decision to make.
Okay, sounds great. So that is unfortunately all the time we have. It's now 10:30 and we have to stop. There are some questions left that we don't have time for. One of them is on YouTube, so if you want to read it, it's on the comments there. But I just want to thank you so much for being here on behalf of the career development and of work, of course. And Ashad or Fernando, do you have any final words? Or Stinus, or
Oh, it's all good. Thank you so much.
Just want to thank you. Yes, and good luck.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to me.
Thanks, Stinus. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a nice day.